just sit with friends and drink and just try some, just have fun and chat with people. It's been so kind of many months kind of not being able to kind of, have social environment with people and go out. So I made the most of it, went into London, sat in the freezing cold in a bar outside by the Embankment. Nice view, windy, really windy and cold, but that did not dampen my spirits.
Yeah, for anyone in doubt, we are talking about pubs and bars reopening.
Yes.
And sorry if you're in a part of the world where your hospitality is still shut. We'll try not to be too smug about it.
Yeah, it will open soon. It will open soon. Yes, my new haircut. If anyone has noticed, that's another thing. Another reason why I feel like a new man today.
Yes,
it's amazing. New era.
A new era. I've got to wait until Monday to get this situation sorted out, and it's a long time, literally a long time coming.
I was in the queue first thing Monday morning. Just the queue. Yeah, just a huge queue outside the barbers. I'm sure many of our other pour and sippers have been in the barbecues in the last few days. But let us know how you're doing, where you're what you've been up to. Have any of you guys been able to get out to any of the bars recently? If you live in England, sorry if you are in Scotland, we do apologise, but your turn is coming up very soon. Yeah, Steve Coleman Williams' first pub trip on Friday. Woo woo. Yeah, absolutely. It's so exciting. I can't believe we could be that excited about just going to the pub, really.
I know, right? And to be honest, thank you so much for tuning in as well, everyone, because I feel like you could be in the pub right now. And we've had a long time of staring at laptop screens. So thank you for tuning in with us and sticking with us. And you will not be disappointed because we've got the last 2 drams of April's box, and they are a duo of sensational Scotch whiskies, if I say so myself.
Yes, they really are. We've got a 29-year-old Grain whiskey, which is wonderful, and a lovely peated dram from a usually unpeated distillery, which we'll discuss more in depth later.
Indeed, and it's incredibly exciting because we've got not one but 2 guests this evening. So we've got guests joining us from both distilleries. We've got, well, I say distilleries, it's a bit of a mystery for the grain, but Stephen's going to chat us through that in just a second. And then second up, we've got Cu Bocan. I hope I'm pronouncing it right.
Green to the Green is not going to the pub until I get my haircut on Saturday. I've been wearing a hat for the last 3 months. I would have gone to the pub with my hair as bad as it was the other day, I have to say. Ian Jambo Rain heading down to my local brewery tomorrow evening. Jeff
straight
got
to the source.
Pardon?
So straight to the source, not even a pub, a brewery.
Yeah, literally straight to the source. Jeff got to go to the pub on Monday, too cold, so came home and warmed up with milk and honey. That is a lovely dram to warm yourself up with. Many other comments saying good evening. Yes, good evening, everyone. Let's make this a great night. It's going to be a great one tonight.
Yeah, let's do it. So if you are joining us for the first time, so maybe April was your box and you missed the first tasting, you've got your big starter kit like this, welcome. Do you have some water to sip along with, because that's always super helpful. And if you're like, oh, I'm not sure about tasting neat spirits, your How to Taste Whiskey guide will help you. And if you've got any questions about any of this at all, get involved, pop them in the comments, particularly about, if it's your first time, let us know, we'll give you a shout out. And if you're like, oh, I don't know how to get the most out of this whiskey, how do I nose it, how do I taste it, what's going on, drop us a line in the comments and we'll get to you. And then also don't forget, you've got your tasting notes, so your tasting card, so you can keep track of your thoughts on all these whiskies, because this is what it's about. It's about you and enjoying these whiskies and what you get from them. We can chat as much as we like, but we want you to love these drams.
And we say it every time. Remember, there are no right or wrong answers regarding your tasting notes. Please just join in. Let us know what you think about the whiskies. Let us know what kind of notes you're getting. There are no right or wrong answers. Everyone's got a different palate. It's totally subjective. Ian Slack has actually said, hello, everyone. Been excited about this batch and very tough not to taste in advance. So very, very good for holding off. I admire you. This is a really good batch. And you and Bòcan, sounds like Cu Bocan. I enjoyed the drams this month. Gareth Peters, celebrated 2-year wedding anniversary on Tuesday, so it's perfect time.
Congratulations.
Congratulations. We'll raise a dram to you two tonight.
We will indeed. But I feel like we've chatted enough. Without further ado, I think we should bring our first guest on screen. So if you missed it earlier, we're going to start off with the Glaswegian 29-year-old. Now, single grain is I love it so much. I was like, I'm talking to Stephen about this. I'm fighting.
Which is why I didn't even need to ask Christy which one. I actually knew which one Christy was doing tonight.
Fabulous. So let's bring in Stephen and say hello. Good evening. How are you doing?
Good. How are you? Good to see you.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited for this dram. I can't even tell you. And getting geeky about single grain is one of my most favourite things ever in the world. So yeah, thank you for joining us and indulging me in this fabulous whiskey, and all the rest of us as well.
Yeah, no, I think it's an interesting lineup tonight. 2 really interesting whiskies, so I know that everybody tuned in. They're right thinkers, and I think there'll be a lot of whys and hows when we go through these whiskies, but they're absolute crackers, and certainly this first one's brilliant for the sunshine that some of us may have been enjoying today.
Yeah, it's been a really glorious day. So Andy, you're going to scuttle off, but obviously come back in a bit. So enjoy the dram off screen.
I've got it lined up ready.
He's got lined up ready. Fabulous. Catch you in a bit.
Bye. Enjoy.
Right, he's gone. Cut him off then. Right, it's gone. Let's on with the whiskey, on with the drams. So first of all, Stephen, tell us a bit about you. So what do you do in whiskey, and how come we are here tasting this dram with you?
Yeah, so I've worked in whiskey, it'll be coming on a decade now. I've worked with alcohol kind of my whole adult life, really. I think, I ended up working in the pubs and bars growing up when I came of age. But I've worked in whiskey, a few years now, and I'm the global whiskey specialist for White & Mackay. So, that's a whiskey company a lot of people will know, but not an awful lot of people will know that within White & Mackay, we have this boutique blending and bottling house called Whiskey Works. So, I'm just a whiskey fan, do it for a living, and it's always a pleasure to jump on here and talk about a couple of whiskies with you.
Oh, fabulous. Well, yeah, thank you for spending your Thursday with us. So your Uncle Vanya is with me here. # single grain rules. Yes, please. I feel like we need to kick off by talking about what single grain is, because I'm really excited. I know your Uncle Vanya's excited, and you're pretty excited too. So what sets this apart from single malt? Like, why should we be excited about single grain?
Well, single grain, remember, this represents the vast majority of output from Scotland's distilleries. But single grain doesn't have the romance that's associated with single malt, because, you visit your single malt distilleries, and to anybody tuned in who's a whiskey fan who hasn't visited a single malt distillery, it isn't all fabrication. They are all beautiful picture postcards, stunning places to visit, the best place to enjoy whiskey. Single grain's a little bit different because of the way it's made. It's made at scale, and it's far more industrial. But the great thing about single grain whiskies is the cask almost tells you a little bit more. Single grains are distilled to a far higher ABV. The cask is a little bit more honest, but they can be so unpredictable. And over the years, some of the single grains I've tried have been bottled, have some incredible characteristics that you would just not expect. And that's definitely true of the 29-year-old Glaswegian that you'll all have in your glasses just now.
Yes. Oh my gosh. So, and this is the thing for me, single grain, it is so different in character and mouthfeel, because by single grain, we mean it can be kind of any grain. Like single malt is obviously malted barley. These can be made from any kind of grain. Can you give us a bit of an insight into what the base grains are potentially for this one?
Yeah, so there'll be a little bit of malt in there, for the, obviously the enzymes help fermentation, but this will be mainly wheat and maize, with maybe 5-10% malt in there as well. But, distilled to a far higher ABV than malt. So, you're pulling out a little bit more, you're pulling back a little bit more. But, like I say, when you put these single grains into cask, depending on the wood that you're using, they can behave in such a fabulous way, and the cask can open up and tell you so much, because there's a little bit less distillery character.
Yeah, and for me, when these single grains spend a long time in oak, and this one 29 years, it's ridiculously old, quite frankly, like so great. I don't know, on the nose even, I'm jumping the gun here, but I can't resist. It feels like almost velvety, like vanilla, velvety, these lovely spices. Like you say, it's sunshine in the glass. I'm absolutely obsessed with it.
Oh, wait till you taste it. It's and we'll come on to that. We want to build up the anticipation, but it hits some brilliant little pleasure receptors in your taste buds. It is an absolute cracker. And single grain's brilliant to whiskey fans out there. It's a great one to pull out if you've got company, somebody who's interested in whiskey, because it's so much more than a drop in a glass. It's actually some great talking points, discussion points around single grains as well. And of course, they're going to be a little bit cheaper. You can get 29-year-old single grain whiskey. It doesn't have to cost the earth, but it really delivers some flavour.
Yeah, it's amazing. Now, before we taste it, I need to ask you to explain column stills. So this is the other fundamental difference, right? We've talked a bit about the fact that the base material, the base grains are different, and they're distilled to a higher ABV. Like, how does that work, and why is that important?
Well, it's where pot stills perform batch distillation. column stills perform continuous distillation. So, you know, you're going to be distilling your wash at a far higher ABV. And distillation is all about selecting flavors. You know, in pot distillation, generally it's done twice. And this, you know, it's all about selecting the flavors that you want to keep, and you want to kind of enhance and you know, the maturation stage. The single grain, you're pulling out quite a lot. You're gonna pull out quite a lot. You're distilling to a very high ABV. And bearing in mind, single grain forms, you know, the foundations for a lot of blends, a lot of blended whiskies. And you'd never say single grains are neutral in flavour, but they're far less pronounced than single malts to form such a great base for your blended whiskies, where the blenders from there can start pulling out some really kind of distinct single malts to develop the character. But yeah, column stills and pot stills, batch distillation versus continuous distillation. So of course, using the columns is quicker, more efficient. That's the idea.
Exactly. And just to clarify, the single bit in the name, so in the same way that single malt is from one distillery, it's exactly the same with grain, right? It's not just one grain. It can be all kinds of grains, but the single bit means it's made in one place. It's not a blend. It's all at one distillery.
Correctamundo.
Yes. Fabulous. And this is a cheeky question. Glaswegian 29-year-old, can you tell us any clues about which distillery it might be?
Well, to anybody who's interested in whiskey, that likes reading up on whiskey, I think there was only one single grain distillery operating in Glasgow 29 years ago. So there's your clue.
There we go. We can do some strategic Googling.
It's a little bit of homework.
A little bit. I like it a lot. We've got some tasting notes coming in already. Do keep them coming in. We absolutely love these. And a quick shout out to Harry, who's just joined the club. Welcome to Pour and Sip. Nigel, great sweet sort of nose, ripe apples and pears. So I feel like people are cracking on already, which is great. And what are you drinking right there? Is this a cocktail I see?
This is the Fever Tree Blood Orange Soda, which is an absolute game changer. This is no alcohol in it.
For a second I was like, have you made some kind of incredible highball with this?
I haven't actually. It's such a nice little palate cleanser on the side. That Blood Orange Soda is brilliant. Great with tequila as well, side note.
Yeah, I mean, oh my gosh, we were chatting a bit about tequila last time. We went on a bit of a tangent about how awesome agave spirits are. So yeah, I'm going to come back to that one. Loads more tasting notes just come in. So Joe F smells like hot butter and vanilla initially. Green tea is green, smooth, almost perfume nose. Ionis, I think, sorry I'm pronouncing your name wrong, getting glue on the nose and lots of spices. Interesting one. Matt Barrington, lovely to drink a whiskey as old as me. Yes. And also happy second birthday to Ralph the Bulldog. I like that. Into. Eddie loves the nose, hot buttered toast, vanilla and coconut. Ian, a bit of varnish on the nose, but not harsh. I love that. That's kind of a bit of a rancio note vibe, which I'm going to ask about in just a second. And then David, chocolate battered toast. Just want to taste it. I mean, I'm holding back a little bit here. So I'm going to ask you about rancio, and then I'm going to get you to take us through the nose. So yeah, talk to us about where these kind of like slightly varnishy, maybe a hint of leathery notes might be coming from.
I think I love these tasting notes, actually. Everybody is certainly barking up the right tree. There's loads and loads going on there. I like these quite contentious tasting notes, things like varnish and leather. And I love when you use these descriptors because they are very evocative. And people always say, well, why would you want to drink varnish? It's not about that. It's these interesting characteristics that you pull out. Where you're going to get those notes, remember, this has been in cask for a long time. You are going to pull out a lot from the wood. It's going to be, you know, deep penetration. You're going to pull a lot of the goodness that's coming out of these American oak casks. But these really pronounced vanilla, butterscotch characteristics, I think, are absolutely bang on because you've got a single grain whiskey here. Very less distinct distillery character. Of course, there is still a little bit of character there, but these casks are coming right over the top with those really heavy, buttery characteristics. And when I put my nose in this Glaswegian, it pulls out a characteristic very evocative for me.
Yeah.
Because, and I don't know if you'll share this childhood memory, I bet loads of people watching will, but I always remember my mum used to make custard, but it was powdered. And she'd add milk and it would go in the pan. I forget the brand, but I'm sure it had a bird on the label. But I used to always smell the custard powder. And this is, I get that on the nose, certainly that rich custard.
Smells
you've got that, good. It smells wonderful, doesn't it? Then you've got that chopped pineapple, mango, exotic fruits, a little bit of desiccated coconut at the end. So it's just super, super interesting. I'm loving hearing the tasting notes come in.
Yeah, we've got even more people are super into this, which is obviously good as a single grain, like absolute lover. So Rob smells delicious butter and caramel. Eddie says hot cross buns toasted with melted butter, candied peel. Oh, so good. Colin's getting strawberries. Shane saying, I never got glue until I heard it and then it jumped out. Colin saying lots of vanilla and toffee, caramel popcorn from Mikola. Pear drops from Jared, toasted coconut on the palate from Jeff. And then a note I quite like from your Uncle Vanya again. I loved introducing my friends to single grain with the Glaswegian, especially lovely for the single malt snobs who are now converted.
No, that's absolutely spot on. I think, we should let everybody know this is 54.2%. A lot of those varnish and glue notes that you're probably picking out, there's a lot of alcohol in there that, you might pull out those notes from. So you're free to add a little bit of water if you want. But no, absolutely delicious.
People are shouting Bird's Custard. That's the brand.
That Bird's Custard. I always remember that. It's the custard powder. It's really, really resonates with me, takes me back. Do you get that? Do you get that kind of rich custard, butterscotch?
Yeah, it's making me think of like bread and butter pudding with custard. Like I think like my gran used to make it, I think, with raisins in it a little bit too. It's like making me think of like proper, like, I don't know, old school, very classic desserts. I'm here for it.
I think it's was it my Uncle Vanya? Was that his handle? I think you've got a point in there that whiskey's becoming so interesting now. And, everybody watching, you'll all be loving going to whiskey bars, certainly now. You go into whiskey bars, you maybe drink new products from distilleries, and some of you are maybe on social media following whiskey brands and people. Whiskey's becoming so interesting. And that's where products like these great whiskies come in. Which is why single malt fans who've maybe rejected single grain as inferior, this will excite them and interest them, because our mantra with Whiskey Works, we started this, it would have been a couple of years ago now. And the idea was, this was an innovation space for a really creative whiskey maker, Greg Glass, that we have, for him to basically take the shackles off and just go nuts without being limited by brand and expectation. He could do what he wants. And that was the idea. There was all these like modern whiskey experiments, and that was where these whiskies come about. But the idea is they're all natural colour, they're all non-chill filtered. This one is natural strength as well. Individually numbered bottles, and these beautiful bottles that you can see behind me. The idea as well is that the flavours are called out in colour on the bottle. And I remember working with a guy years ago. He used to taste whiskies and reference everything to colour. The fruits are green, the spice is dark. Everything was always very colour orientated, because we do almost drink with our eyes.
Yeah.
So on the Glaswegian, you've got that big dark butterscotch colour, the almost yellowy orange, and you've got the gold representing brandy snaps, which I think is quite cool, or creamy custard. Really, really nice. So it's a really nice talking point if you can pull a bottle of this out next time you've got somebody over for a dram.
Yeah, I love it. And you know what? I quite often, like, without sounding slightly too bonkers, like tasting colour. Like whiskies will just bring a colour to mind. It's the same with other flavours too. I think a lot of people have that with other things, like flavours or words can have a colour or words can have a taste. It's really interesting. Now, I'm going to get you to talk us through the palette of this, because I can't wait. But Gareth has, in his own words, jumped the gun. Wow, this is the best whiskey I have actually tasted. Wow, which is like high praise indeed. Mikolai saying absolute truth for my pour and sip debut. And I literally, am I still here? Hopefully I'm still here. Yeah, my computer's just been really silly for a second. But yeah, I mean, oh my gosh, talk us through the palette, because I can't wait. I just can't wait.
It's so good hearing those comments, because it is an unbelievable whiskey. I love pulling this out every now and then, because it's so striking and intriguing. Certainly on the nose, you've got that rich custard, butterscotch up front, desiccated coconut, bags of wood spice as well. So this was a collection of ex-bourbon casks, aged in Dunwich warehouses, single grain whiskey for 29 years. So you're getting loads of wood spice coming through from these ex-bourbon casks as well, which is lovely. If you have a little taste and hold this in your mouth for quite some time, really, it's going to coat your mouth. It's delicious.
Mm. Oh my gosh, so good. Mouthful. That texture is extraordinary. So great.
It's wonderful, and it's that really profound tropical exotic fruit note as well. On the nose, it's more pineapple. The palate, bags of apricot and peach. Coat in your mouth, it's like peaches and cream. I get a lot of them. If you've ever had buttered popcorn, you know, butter drizzled on popcorn, makes me think of the cinema. Lots of that lots of those notes coming through. Absolutely.
What is?
Yeah, it's a little bit of patisserie there as well. Bit of pastry, bit of brioche. A lot of spice coming through at the end.
It's so creamy. And then just a quick note on the texture. So I'm finding this like really like mouth-filling and creamy. It's making my mouth water, but it is a little bit of a higher ABV. So Shane's saying that as a newer whiskey drinker, I do find this one numbs the mouth a little. If you're finding that, I reckon, as you said earlier, just drop a splash of water in and see if that opens it out, helps a little bit.
Definitely, yeah, add a little splash of water. Whiskies like this cope really well with water. Whiskies behave in different ways. You know, sometimes adding water to a really old whiskey doesn't work because, you know, the whiskey's maybe a little bit more fragile because of time in cask. This works really well with just a little splash of water. Bring the ABV maybe down to 40, 45. What you'll notice is you get a sweet spice. It's almost cinnamon. It makes the tip of your tongue tingle. It's just really, really tasty. So by all means, add a little splash of water in there if you're finding the ABV a lit's bit too high.
Yeah, so good. And some more comments come in. And a quick question, actually, that I'll put to you before I run through some more tasting notes. Tom's saying, how many casks went into this? And were they all the same profile bourbon? Or like, did they have other things going on in them as well?
They were all ex-bourbon casks. I think off the top of my head, I think it was 11. Don't quote me on that. But it's how many bottles is it? I think it's 1,642 bottles. All ex-bourbon casks. So they would have been 200, 250 litre casks.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it was 10, 11 casks that were laid down in dunnage warehouses. So they weren't in palleted or racked warehouses. So it was damp, it was dark, cobwebs, humid, brilliant conditions for casks to work their magic.
I do think you get happy whiskey out of a dunnage warehouse for sure. That does make sense. Fabulous. Who left the milk out late to the session but getting burnt orange? This is a gem. Steve Coleman Williams, apple, caramel, and a something. I think it's tobacco on the notes, but not sure. I think I agree. Like it's like proper tobacco leaf a little bit maybe. Eddie's definitely getting bread and butter pudding. Yes. And custard with you, stewed apples, ginger, cinnamon, and clove. Colin says, wow, first sip and what a punch. Powerful spices, lots of alcohol. Yep, the alcohol warning is there. 3 drops of water really opens the nose up, says Joe. Suddenly there's toffee, apple and warm oak. Lovely. Simon, oh my, that's amazing. Yes, I'm also thoroughly enjoying this dram.
I think you see if this whiskey opens doors to single grain for people that are dialed in. Brilliant. Go out and explore single grain, because you'll discover a whole world of whiskey that you maybe hadn't explored before. And there's some absolute belters out there from distilleries that you've maybe never heard of, distilleries that you wouldn't necessarily visit. But there'll be whiskies that you've probably tried in some of your favourite blends. But honestly, some older single grain whiskies can be absolutely wonderful.
Yeah, 100%. And I feel like single grain is so often maligned, and so can blends be as well. Let's face it. I think we've had some absolutely cracking blends in Pour and Sip, but it does have a reputation of being like lesser or less exciting. But, you know, the artistry in creating a blend, or even in blending different casks together for an expression like this, or a single malt, because even though it's from one distillery, it's still, as we said earlier, 10 or 11 casks. I feel like the artistry is really similar, actually. It's still putting component parts together in an incredible way. And I love what single grain brings to the party. It's incredible.
No, totally. Couldn't agree more. I think whiskey blending, they're still blending to a flavour profile. The artistry is still there. I think people like to know a single malt's from this part of Scotland, and it's got that kind of traceability and that romance that people really like. And I love that element of whiskey, that side of whiskey, the romantic location, you know, the misty glens, the Roman and the gloaming, the waves crashing off the rocks. Okay, single grain might not have that in the same way, but you know what? It can absolutely deliver on flavour. And this 29-year-old Glaswegian is such a great example of that.
So great. So just a few more and then a question. Rob says he loves the idea of a cinema whiskey. I mean, yeah, same. Why not? Batman Joker 66, quite an easy sipper given the volume. I agree, like it's a higher ABV dram, but it's really sippable, really gorgeous. Colin, the aftertaste makes my gums tingle long after it's gone. Getting spice at the end with black pepper. Anyone else? And yeah, I'm with you on the spice. Chris says it didn't burn as much as I thought it might. Really creamy with a black pepper finish. There you go. Someone's agreeing with you on the pepper. This is a wowzers. Yes, it's a wowzers. Green tea is green. My wife just had a quick nose and sip and declared, this is the nicest one I've tasted. Yes. And then we've got Owen. He was asking a really important question, actually, which I did skip over a bit. What's a dunnage warehouse? Like, what are different types of warehouses and why are they important?
Dunnage warehouse. So that's what you'll find at single malt distilleries generally. You'll find dunnage warehouses. So damp, dark, low ceiling. You know, your casks are generally stacked 3 high. So a very consistent temperature throughout. Perfect for slow maturation. That's why Scotch whisky is the best alcohol in the world, because of slow maturation, increasing complexity and depth that you might not get from spirits that are aged in a hot climate where there's loads of fast interaction. Dunnage warehouses, they're damp, they're cobwebs, they're musky, earthy. They are one of the best places to enjoy whisky if you get a chance to wander in and have a dram out of cask. It's a life-changing moment.
I do think it's so evocative, these spaces, right? Like you were saying earlier, dusty cobwebs. I don't know. It's a unique environment, and the smell, the aroma, is just wonderful. Again, apologies if I'm pronouncing your name wrong. Ionis has asked, how is it that we don't know the distillery, by the way? Like, why is it kept under wraps?
Well, it wasn't about the distillery. It was about more the flavour and how brilliant the whisky tasted as opposed to where it was from. Because that distillery is not there anymore. The distillery was closed that this spirit came from, but it was the only single grain distillery operating in Glasgow 29 years ago. And I think actually at one point it might have been Scotland's biggest distillery. It was a monster, this single grain. But yeah, it's one of those ones. It was more about flavour and more about a modern approach to whisky than calling out the distillery. But you can do a little bit of homework, find out what distillery was open in Glasgow 29 years ago, and there's your answer.
Yeah, it's really easy to find. You guys can be sleuths for sure. You've got this. Just some more comments to round off for now a little bit. Ian saying single grain all the way now, if this is anything to go by. Outstanding, and thanks for including it in this month's batch. And then Adrian saying a few drops of water adds to the creamy mouthfeel. Great first dram of the night. I agree. I think this is an absolutely stunning dram. I'm loving it, honestly. And I know I'm biased because I adore single grain anyway, but it is truly a joy.
What I would love to hear, Christy, would be some ideas about what we can do with this. Because I've tried that. This is great with like a fruit salad. You know, after dinner, if you've got a fruity dessert, it's brilliant. But, you know, I've done a couple of different pairings in terms of food. I've not mixed it. I think I quite enjoy drinking it as it is, maybe a splash of water. But I'd love to hear the viewers' thoughts on some creative ideas on how to sip this alongside something delicious that we can make at home. No banana bread, please.
Yeah, I mean, this is amazing. And oh my gosh, the amount of chat we've had about cheese before. For me, my mind's immediately gone to cheese. But actually, I've had single grain with beautiful vanilla ice cream while watching the Wimbledon final before. I mean, I'm not into strawberries because let's not go there. They just gross me out a little bit. But vanilla ice cream is my Wimbledon go-to. Vanilla ice cream and single grain. What more could you want, quite frankly?
That's a wonderful call. No, that's a great call. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that'd be. Oh, sorry,
I like the idea of like a pineapple tart or something, some kind of tropical fruit baked, a wee scoop of ice cream on the side, and a good sensible measure of the Glaswegian.
Definitely. Steve is saying 100% sticky toffee pudding. I mean, that would work for sure. Bob is saying cheese in block capitals, exclamation marks. But which cheese is the question? Which cheese would you go for? Cheese talk coming up again. I know. I'm sorry, Ian. I can't help it. Chris, tart tatin. I mean, I don't know what that is. What is this?
Tart tatin. It's like an upside down apple cake pastry. You can do it with pineapple as well. Tart tatin. That's a great shout.
That sounds so good. Colin saying apple crumble and custard. Do you know what I think we need to do? And this is like a bold idea. We need to do some kind of like whiskey bake-off phenomenon where people can like show us, like share pictures of their desserts and whiskey pairings. I think that would be incredible.
I think there's definitely something in that.
I want to see it. If you're baking this weekend and you've got any drams left, like show us. I want to see on the Pour and Sip channels all of your creations.
We could take that idea to the BBC maybe.
I mean, it'd be great, wouldn't it? I mean, we'd have to like find a new angle perhaps. But obviously the whiskey pairing is the one. We're there. Brilliant. Just a couple more. So Eddie's saying creme brulee. Your Uncle Vanya's saying soft pineapple cheese with almonds.
Oh,
that's as well. my gosh, this always happens. Like, I always end up so hungry on these tastings. Stewie Baby saying apple pie. Mike saying on a winter's day with the weather lashing outside, or cool weather. I think that's a type of cake. I'm not sure. I don't have a sweet tooth, so I'm not across my my desserts, which is quite upsetting, really.
No, definitely. I think there's so many different things you can do with that. A little bit more alcohol as well. That would cut right through something creamy and buttery. Yeah, I think I've not had my dinner yet, so I'll see what's in the freezer. I've got a chalk ice or a Magnum maybe. Might have to suffice, but I'll definitely try something. And yeah.
I think a Magnum is all good. Oh my gosh. Right, now we're super hungry. Thank you so much, Stephen. At this point, I'm going to zip Andy back in. Hi, Andy. How are you doing? How are you coping with all this dessert?
I can't believe you've done it again, Christy. We've gone on a cheese. You've mentioned cheese again. It's happened again.
What can I say? But what do you think of the dram?
I love this. And I'm not huge on, been big into single grain whiskey. Not out of choice, just out of not actually trying as much as I have with single malt. This is the kind of one that's absolutely going to change people's mind if they did have any preconceptions about grain whiskey. I mean, for me, it wasn't single grain, but Compass Box, the hedonism was the one that changed my mind about grain whiskey in general. But this, I always say, 29 years in cask is just amazing. And single grain whiskey at that kind of age really does give people the chance to taste a much older whiskey at a much better price point than they would with a single malt. And I think that's awesome.
I think 29 years in cask, naturally you would think before tasting this you're going to get an overload of wood and tannin and spice. There's a little bit of wood spice coming through, definitely. But where is that beautiful, tropical, fruity flavour coming from? It's wonderful. It's just beautifully integrated. And it's funny you should say that. The one that changed my idea of single malt was a Canvas 40-year-old that I tried maybe 5-6 years ago. And it was just like umbongo. It was mangoes, pineapples. I did not know whiskey could behave like that. And that changed my perception.
That's the best tasting note I've ever had, by the way. Umbongo. You bet.
Love it. Well, Stephen, please hang around and join us again at the end when we're just going to have some time just to geek out as per usual. So if you've got any more questions for Stephen, hold them and he'll be back in a bit. But yeah, thank you so much for chatting us through that amazing grain.
Pleasure.
See you in a bit. Cheers. Fabulous. Oh my gosh, what a way to kick off the evening. And there's more to come. We're only halfway through.
And now for something completely different.
Completely different. On that cue, I'm going to buzz in Scott. Hey, Scott, how goes?
Very good, thanks. How are you guys?
Oh my gosh, I'm doing really well. I mean, I've got a pair of incredible whiskies. It's a Thursday, the sun's shining. It's all good.
It's perfect. Good start to I'm going to say the weekend, but it's a bit early yet, isn't it?
I mean, you're on fake Friday time, I gather. It feels like that.
Yeah, definitely. We don't have pubs, so we just have longer weekends.
Well, I mean, there's got to be compensation somehow, right? That's all good.
Absolutely.
Amazing. Well, I'm going to leave you in Andy's very capable hands, and I can't wait to try the dram.
Yeah.
See you in a bit, folks.
See you, Christy. Bye. Yeah. How's it going, Scott?
Very good, thanks, Andy. How are you?
I'm not too bad, thank you. Like I said before, I'm still maybe slightly delicate, sorry, all viewers, due to going out last night. But there's nothing better than a couple of drams of whiskey to kind of sort that out.
Yeah, it'll level you off now.
That's exactly it.
I mean, after a few months, I think feeling tender is well earned, isn't it?
Yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, I welcomed the hangover this time.
Yeah.
I welcomed it.
It might not be that in a week's time or so, eh?
Yeah, absolutely. Right, so talk to us a bit about yourself and how you ended up, in the job you're in at the moment. You're brand ambassador, obviously, for...
Yeah. So I grew up, still live about half an hour north of Inverness. So as we were saying before, I'm about a 10-minute walk from Dalmore in one direction and a 10-minute walk from Tinninich in the other direction. So I was kind of spoilt with whiskey growing up.
Which way would you turn first? What was your first turn, really?
Well, I did work at White and Mackay for a year, so I think that's the obvious answer. But I mean, it's so growing up in this area, you're surrounded by whiskey almost to the point that you take it for granted. So I didn't really have much of an interest, but I studied Scottish history at university. And that led to me doing an 8-week internship at Tomatin, researching the history of the distillery back in 2012. And as this strange industry does, it morphed into a variety of different roles. So having studied Scottish history and researching the history of the distillery, I found myself working as the European sales manager for Tomatin. So one of those tedious links. But yeah, so I looked after sales in Europe. And then went to White and Mackay for a year and looked after sales to venture markets. And then one night I had a few drinks and a curry with my old boss, and he said that Tomatin were looking for a global brand ambassador for all the brands, so Cu Bocan as well, that we're going to try tonight, and asked if I would like to take that role. So I went back to the distillery in 2018 as the global brand ambassador. And being based at the distillery, that role's really developed to the point that I also work alongside our master distiller, Graham Unson, in things like cask selection, blending, and new product development and things like that. So it's one of those many hat sort of roles.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, that sounds like a great progression. But I mean, I'm just so jealous and envious of you guys having grown up with whiskey, just breathing whiskey from such a young age.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just amazing, really.
It is one of those things, though, that you really do. Like I say, I took it for granted. You know, I always knew someone whose dad worked at a distillery. It was just like knowing someone who drove a lorry, you know, much in the same way that if you've got a world landmark on your doorstep, so like Loch Ness is just along the road, you take that for granted until you see somebody who's not been there see it for the first time. Yeah. And that was very much me in that 8-week internship at the distillery. Within just that 8 weeks, my mind was blown about, you know, you never really knew the craftsmanship that was going on behind those doors and the passion that these guys have for the wonderful liquids they create.
I mean, anyone who steps foot in them is instantly just, you just instantly soak up, and it's just instantly, you're just, oh, I love this. This is such an amazing world to kind of immerse yourself in.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, within the first week, that was me kind of going to every tasting that I could find locally and just fully immersing myself in it. And it was job first, and then very, very quickly after, a passion for whiskey came.
Well, it's a great position to be in. Talk to us about a bit of, for those of the poor and sippers who aren't aware, talk to us a bit about Tomatin Distillery, because obviously the Cu Bocan that we're going to be trying is, you know, it's a peated version of, you know, that you guys produce. So just talk to us a bit about the distillery.
Yeah, so Tomatin is a Highland distillery, 15 miles to the south of Inverness, and it was established in 1897 by a man called John McDougall, who himself was an illicit distiller, so we believe. And it very much became the first Highland distillery to be built away from the coast. It's 315 meters above sea level, and we were able to do that because the Highland Railway line was being built at the same time. So from its inception was very different to the kind of classic coastal distilleries that a lot of people know from the Highlands. It was a very small distillery to start with, but by the 1970s, it had grown to become the biggest single malt distillery in Scotland, second biggest in the world at the time after Hakushu in Japan. Wow. And this is actually a really interesting time point in terms of the Cu Bocan story, because up until the 1960s, the spirit that would have been made at Tomatin was a lightly peated style. But then in the 1960s, with the discovery of North Sea oil, there was no need to use peat as much. The other energy sources came down in price. And at that time, when we were developing to become, I mean, when we were the biggest distillery in Scotland, 99% of what we were producing was being sold to the blended industry. So we had to create a very versatile, non-peated, fruity spirit. And that's what Tomatin still is today. So kind of the mid-60s, we moved away from that peated style that was the classic Highland style up until that point. And Tomatin went on to fuel the blended whiskey industry. Then from the 1990s till today has focused on its single malt range and is very much a traditional Highland single malt range with its own cooperage on site, all these cool little quirks to it as well.
It's kind of unique in that aspect. I mean, everything is done on site, and I mean, everyone works on site and they live at the distillery as well. And
that's right, yeah. So, I mean, every cask that we produce is matured on site. We have all our warehousing on site, cooperage on site. The only thing we don't do is the malting, just because, you know, when we were producing 12.5 million litres, you would need football fields of malting floors, you know. But yeah, we've got 30 cottages on site where the majority of our staff live. I lived there for 4 years myself before moving back up a little bit north, back to the coast to get a suntan, which hasn't gone so well. Yeah, but yeah, so it's a really, really unique distillery. But in 2005, we also do our own blended whiskies as well. And in 2005, we were noticing that the availability of peated whiskey for blends was really, really dropping. And the decision was made at that time to produce our own peated spirit. So for the last week of the year in 2005, the last week before the Christmas closure, we took in some lightly peated Scottish barley and we run that through the process. And we've been doing that every year since. And what started off as being intended for using in blends, when our now master distiller, Graham Unson, joined in 2011, he started started nosing and tasting these casks and playing about with it, and effectively created what we have as Cu Bocan today. But it's much more than just a peated tomatin, and we'll maybe get into that as well.
Yeah, I mean, we'll get into that when we start nosing. What I find is interesting about this is that, you know, a lot of times when distilleries that don't produce peated whiskey do a peated whiskey, it's usually just this massive, bold kind of peated whiskey. But this is something that's like subdued, light, but has also kept the distillery character of tomatin in there as well. And I think that's super interesting. It's one of the reasons I like this trend. We will get onto that in a bit. Talk to us a bit about the Cu Bocan just in general, as like the story behind the Cu Bocan, because it's really interesting why it's called Cu Bocan.
Yeah, so when we originally developed the brand back in 2013, we had the spirit, we had this incredible whiskey, but we really didn't want to call it like tomatin peated. We wanted to do something a bit more with it. And we researched, it came from the kind of historical research that I was doing at the time and tapping into a little bit of folklore. And one of the stories was that so the last wolf in Scotland was killed near Tomatin, and that the ghost of that still haunts the local area. And Cu Bocan translates to ghost dog. So Cu in Gaelic is dog, and Bocan is spirit or ghost. Gaelic's one of those languages where that's, you know, they've got, like the Eskimos having 50 words for snow. I think the Gaels have about 50 words for ghost, you know. Yeah. So it was one of those stories. But luckily over time, as we've lain down more stock and as we've been much more creative, we've been able to kind of redirect the story a little bit and focus rather on what's in the bottle than the myth around it. And when you see the bottle today and the packaging, it's all very much about the liquid that's in the bottle and the spirit and how we make that.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's talk to us a bit about. So, we're bottled at 46%. It's non-chill filtered. No, it's natural colouring, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Casks, because there's a few interesting casks that have been used to kind of marry this together.
Yeah, so Cu Bocan, it's made with lightly peated Scottish barley every winter in limited batches, and that gives us that subtly smoky spirit that you touched on. You know, I always refer to the smoke in Cu Bocan as almost like your salt and pepper. They're really well integrated flavors rather than the dominant one. And I think, you know, like every single malt, you've got two elements. You've got your spirit and you've got your maturation. And from the spirit side here, it is very traditional. It is very much what was being produced up until the 1960s at Tomatin. So it's a very classic spirit base. But back in the 1960s, there wasn't really much emphasis placed on cask selection or maturation. You know, it was kind of whatever you could get a hold of at the time. And then over the last 20 years, our understanding as an industry of maturation has really skyrocketed. So with Cu Bocan, we take that traditional spirit, but we apply this really modern approach to maturation. And it's really interesting being on with Stephen there and listening to him talking about Whiskey Works, because what they're doing there from a blender point of view, a boutique blending house point of view, it's very similar to what we're doing with Cu Bocan as a single malt, and having no shackles or anything like this. So the signature that we have here is the only ongoing product in the range. But after that, we have the creations. And these are all about just focusing on flavor and using casks in a really almost experimental way. You know, we've only been producing this spirit for 15 years, at most 2 weeks a year. And in that time, we've filled over 50 different cask types. So one of the creations has Japanese shochu casks in it. The other one's muscatel and stout casks. But what we have here is really the whiskey that started it all. And so back in 2005, we filled some first fill bourbon barrels, some first fill Oloroso sherry butts. So all very normal so far. But then we also filled some virgin North American oak casks. And I think over the last 5 years, virgin oak has become much more common. But back in 2005, nobody in Scotland was using virgin oak casks. So when Graham started creating the recipe in 2013, what he finally came up with, everything here is a minimum of 9 years old. 60% of the recipe is fully matured in bourbon barrels, 25% fully matured in Oloroso sherry butts, and 15% fully matured in virgin North American oak, and then married together.
And that's great. So what can we expect? What are those casks going to bring? So guys are already getting onto your tasting notes. We're going to know. So what do those casks bring? Because obviously with the sherry, we get these should get these dried fruit kind of baking spice notes. The bourbon cask should give us those vanilla kind of creamy notes. And then the virgin oak cask, I mean, talk to us a bit about virgin oak, because some of the, people might not be aware as much about virgin oak as a cask and using as for maturation.
Absolutely. So first of all, we've got that spirit there, that underlying smoky aroma, and it's different to what you would get from your Islays. It's much more of a campfire, ashy smoke. As you say, your bourbon barrels, they are your honeys, your milk chocolate, sort of coconut flavors. The sherry casks, they do have that dry fruit element, but the one thing that I love out of the sherry casks is the smoke really dries out some of the sweetness from the Oloroso, and you get this wonderful kind of paprika spice note that I've never tried it anywhere else. But the virgin oak's really interesting. And sometimes when we're doing tastings of this, we do a deconstruction and we try the individual casks. And I went on my honeymoon to Rome, and when I came back, I took a case of limoncello with me. I got carried away and I just fell in love with the stuff and took it back.
It is the best.
I think I still got 5 of the 6 bottles, But I often tell that story because I think the virgin oak is a little bit like what would happen if a Scotch whiskey distiller went to Kentucky and just got carried away. Yeah. Our master distiller, Graham, refers to that spirit in and of itself as a mid-Atlantic malt because it's very much a Scotch whiskey spirit, but the flavors are like, some of your incredible, like Elijah Craig barrel proofs and these lovely bourbons. So I think it's fascinating. You've got to be really careful with it though, because it can overpower a whiskey. So that's why we only use 15% there, and it's just going to add spices and that sort of. There's almost like a pecan pie note that comes from the virgin North American oak.
Well, on that note, we should get to giving this a nose. I'm going to read out a few of the taste notes because everyone has jumped to the gun here, which I don't blame you, by the way. It smells so beautiful in the glass. Gareth Peters, nice and smoky, getting the campfire feels. Trevor Shulton, very smoky and peaty. Brenton Flood, a hint of cider. Steve Coleman Williams, strong pepper with a light mix of apple and pears. Bruce Rawlings, definite fruit note on the nose. Nigel Gain getting the smoky aroma. Shane Parker, for me, lots of butter and honey up front on the nose and some dried fruit in the background. So yeah, you're getting the bourbon cask. You're also getting sherry cask as well. Maybe my nose is broken, but I'm not finding any smoke on the nose at all. But so, I mean, we discussed this as well. So this is not the kind of Islay peated Ardbeg Lefroy. It's, when we talk about peat, we talk about peat levels as well. We talk about ppm. I mean, this is very, very lightly peated. I mean, we must be talking about 15.
On the money, yeah. So it's a really interesting one because, so to go to the production level and maybe get a little bit geeky there, everything changes for that last couple of weeks of the year. So as well as taking in that lightly peated barley, we have a different mashing regime. We have a much shorter fermentation. So the fermentation on Cu Bocan is about 50 hours. For Tomatin, it's 168. So totally different. And then we take a wider distillation cut. But no matter what we've done, I mean, in recent years, we've taken barley in at 40 ppm, and it still comes out as this really, really gentle, kind of well ingrained smoke. It's not dominant. And I think that all goes back to the stills that we've got. No matter how we run them, we can't get over the fact that the stills were designed to create a light, fruity, sweet spirit. And And that's absolutely right. It's great to see that so many people have got smoke out there. But I always tell people with Signature that it's a little bit like if you go into a forest and you're going to meet your friends camping and they've got a campfire in the distance, you've got so much more aroma of the trees and things to get to before you actually get the smoke, and then it is there. But yeah,
it's notice it. And it's always one of those things. Once you notice it, then you really, it stays and it's there at the forefront.
Yeah. Yeah, once you find it, it's almost inescapable. So it's quite nice to have that first little bit of not finding it and then get the surprise. But yeah, absolutely. For me, the nose is very much led by the bourbon cask.
Yeah, honey, kind of heather honey, vanillas.
Yeah,
I mean, wonderful wood spice as well. And there's, the smoke is so delicate and stuff, and you're not losing that kind of tomato fruity note. I'm getting a lot of tropical notes as well, kind of coconuts and cream, lime, like pineapple, maybe barbecued on the, pineapple put on the barbecue. It's, really, really wonderful nose.
I always get that that lemon meringue pie, with just like the torched the top to the meringue. Just that is there for me on the nose a lot. And it's interesting because, not to say that the sherry casks then dominate the taste, but you do get more of the fruit on the taste and more of the spice. So it's nice to have this kind of first interaction with that sweetness before you get some more of the spices.
Well, on that note, I think we should all give this a try. So please do keep on coming in with your tasting notes. We're going to try this now. This is the first time for me on the palate, so let's give it a go. Cheers, everybody.
Cheers.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's a nuttiness on that finish as well, by the way, that I just didn't notice the first time. Yeah. Wonderful. Yeah, it's a light peat. It's there. It's so there, but it's so subdued and balanced and so delicate and balanced so beautifully with those kind of fruitier notes and the kind of honey that I just think this works so well. And I often don't find that when a lot of distilleries do a peated version, that they're not, peated distilleries. This one, for me, works on every level.
Yeah, it's like you say. I mean, I think there have been times where we thought, wouldn't it be great if we could create something heavily peated, but the distillery doesn't allow us to do that. So let's use it to our advantage, and we get this lovely light peat. And like I say, it's, if you dial the clocks back and go back to the 30s, 40s, 50s, peat wasn't used for flavor like it's used today. It was used out of necessity as a fuel source. And in many ways, it was seen as an off note, which is mind-boggling when you think about some of the incredible peated whiskies that you get.
I say this all the time. Sorry, Scott. I mean, whenever I tell someone, I'm like, you should try the Lefroy 10 car strength. It smells like TCP and wet socks. It tastes like engine fuel and charcoal and coal. And you're like, how does that sound like something that tastes good? I'm like, no, trust me, that tastes really, really good.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, so yeah, it's always mind-boggling to me that back in a period of time that was not desirable, and I think over the years peated distillers have dialed that ppm up to a level that we're now familiar with today. But this style, this very gentle smoke, is very, very similar to, if you ever get the chance to try these incredible old bottles of 10-year-old whiskey made maybe 50 years ago. It's very much like that. And for me, it's not so much about being smoky as it is about drying the sweetness out a little bit. And you tend to find that modern whiskies are quite sweet, whereas this has a little drying effect, but still with that experimental maturation running through it.
Absolutely. I mean, the dry, there's a lovely spice as well on this that kind of was lingering, like a licorice, star anise kind of spice as well. That was really, really wonderful. I'm just going to get to a couple more tasting notes because they're all coming in quite quickly. I don't want to miss out on it. So Mike Thomas, apple orchards in the rain. Eddie Marshall getting a taste of bitter marmalade on toast with a lovely spice. Very subtle smoke on the finish. Rob Bester, definitely a sweetness like pears. Slight bit of butter as it's left in the glass. Richard Francis, delicious, fruity, chocolate and raisin, like bonfire smoke rather than cigar. Brilliant. Bruce Rawlings, for me, the peat comes out more on the nose with a drop of water. I mean, that's absolutely true. I haven't put water in this one at the moment, but I mean, with a drop of water, I can imagine this will really open up as well. I mean, I don't want to ask you, I mean, because you're probably not going to tell me, but I mean, there's different types of peat, obviously. So, the Isla peat is so different to the Highland peat. Obviously, in location, it changes. The Isla peat is close to the coast. Highland peat is very much inland. It's heathery, it's woody, whereas the Isla peat is much more kind of maritime kind of salinity in there. Yeah. What are we dealing with here?
We're looking at St. Fergus here. So St. Fergus is the Aberdeenshire peat moss. So very much the kind of Highland style. A lot of, so going super geeky, Isla, so peat is effectively decomposed plant matter that is built up, partially decomposed plant matter, I should say, that is built up in layers for thousands of years. If you multiply that number by 10, you get coal. But it can only ever be made up of the vegetal matter that grew in that part of the world. So if you look at Isla, very little in the way of trees. So it's all that sphagnum moss that creates that wonderful salty, iodine flavors. And not to forget that the island was underwater for a long time. When you go to the Highlands and when you go to the St. Fergus moss, there's a lot more wood content. There's a lot more trees, a lot more, it's effectively lignin content. And it's what gives it that kind of campfire, burning wood aroma in the whiskey. And I think it's interesting that after thousands of years underground, this sort of burning tree element comes out again. So yeah.
This would, for me, be it's a campfire dram, this one. I'd absolutely love to be sitting around a bonfire with this one, maybe some toasted marshmallows on the side. That's another pairing for this one, but it really strikes me as a wonderful campfire dram, this one.
Yeah, it's fantastic for that. It's very much, for me, it's a summer outdoor kind of early evening, almost perfect for a day like today at this time of night, sitting out by a fire. It's ideal for that.
Yeah, Adrian Carr, quite soft, subtle peat. White orchard fruits, mainly perfumey, light cereal notes on the nose too. Green tea is green. First nose was a bit of a surprise after the Glaswegian. There is a reason we put this after the Glaswegian, because I mean it's peaty, and obviously a peaty whiskey before something like the Glaswegian might kind of spoil it a bit. It's definitely for the end of the night. Quite sharp with an edge almost of Parmesan, with air getting a bit more caramel. Eddie Marshall getting pears and brioche on the nose, a slight maltiness. I never get any smoke on the nose with this. Like we said, it's a delicate, subtle peat, but Scott's analogy there and his story is a really good point. And then when you do notice it, you will really, really kind of be more aware of it. Jeff, I keep getting bananas. I get that tropical fruit kind of vibe as well. Gareth Peters, it was very fresh, not as heavy as I thought. Really nice surprise. Kevin Harris, honey on the nose. Nigel Gain, yes, a gentle peat aroma, very smooth and very light. Well, there's absolutely loads of tasting notes coming. Steve Coleman-Williams, how is the peat added? I assume it's not just thrown into the barrel. Yes, of course. And we talk with this is peat dried barley, of course.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So in the malting process, after you've steeped your barley and allowed it to germinate, so that so that you can access the starch in the barley, you have to dry it. So malting is all about tricking the barley into thinking it's springtime and to activate those stored up sugars that we're then going to hijack and turn into alcohol. But you have to stop that process. If not, effectively, your barley is going to shoot and start to become a barley field. Now, you can do that by just using hot air, effectively like a massive hairdryer, and that will stop the germination. And that's what we use for non-peated whiskey. So when we're creating tomatin, that's what we use. But historically, there was no other fuel sources in Scotland. We had to use peat in the same way that other places would use coal or oil. And when you burn the peat, it's full of a family of flavor active compounds called phenols. And as the smoke is rising, those phenols attach themselves and embed themselves into the barley and create this wonderful smoky element into a whiskey. And when we're talking about peat levels and we say ppm, what we're talking about is phenol parts per million. So it's a measurement of those peat flavors in the barley. And you can get things like Octomore, which are up at over 100 ppm, but your standard heavily peated whiskies are Lafroigs, Lagavulins at your 45 to 50 mark. Ardbegs in that realm as well. We're down at, in the bottle, I would say 15 ppm. And that's another thing. What you get in your barley is not necessarily what will be left at the end of production.
Which is very much why, ppm sometimes throws me a bit, because you can see something, like an Octomore is 120 ppm. And then I try something bottled at 50, it says 50 ppm, like maybe like a Lafroig 10 or something. I assume that for me, it's peatier. that one is. I mean, the Freud 10 cask strength for me is my favourite, like absolute peat bomb.
Yeah.
But this is actually bringing us on to next month's whiskey. Now, the thing I love about this Cu Bocan is I think this is a great way to convince people who don't like peated whiskey to kind of get into peated whiskey. So with our next box, we did say we were doing something a bit more on a theme. I will say no more, but you can probably work it out for yourselves where the geography of that box is going to be. And yeah, exactly. Bob by saying, I'm not a peaty whiskey guy, but the subtle peat on this is really, really nice. David Stanton finished long with salty caramel, peat, port and cheese. This would be a wonderful whiskey to pair with cheese for me, like a Stilton, like a really lovely aged Stilton. Nigel Game, nicely warming, is no doubt very good with cheese, perhaps a Leicester, so it's somewhat different. Steve Coleman Williams, brilliant. Thank you for the explanation. He's saying there's Scott. Right, so I think, unfortunately, we're coming to the end of this, and I've realised we've now hit half past, and I think I'm going to have to ask Christy and Steve to come back. But thank you so much for talking us through that dram. A really, really wonderful dram, I have to say.
Oh, there we go. We're there. I'm not sure what happened then. Hi, everyone.
What did you think, Christy? Did you enjoy that?
Oh, very much so. I totally agree. I feel like the subtle peat, it almost like adds a real complexity to it rather than being like a peated whiskey. It's like, it really makes you think, and it's like, oh, what am I getting here? And this, and this. And it's much more like, I don't know, well-rounded, multifaceted, lots going on than some that are like smoke. So yeah, really quite.
Which is why I think it's really clever as well, not calling it tomatin peated and calling it Cu Bocan. As well, because you don't initially you don't go to that thing, oh, this is going to be a big kind of peated whiskey, this one's peated, and then get disappointed because it's 15 ppm. It's a bit of a delicate kind of peat. And actually, Batman Joker here saying really don't like peated whiskey, but this is lovely. Colin Barthgate, really interesting discussion, guys. That's fascinating to hear about the reasons for different kinds of peat in different regions. Guys, as we always do, just before we wrap up for the night, please do let us know which your favourite dram from this month's box has been. So out of the 5, please let us know if you can remember the drams we drank at the start.
So of course we had milk and honey from Israel, we had Few, and we had Waterford. So it was a real mix this month in the box.
Absolutely.
And then, as well, just a super quick reminder, if you loved any of these whiskies, we've got our exclusive member discounts in the Pour and Sip store. So that's all of the salesy stuff I'm going to do, but don't forget to check it out. And while you're there, do check out the Pour and Sip digest if you haven't already, because it's like our very own blog. There's exclusive interviews, lots of education, know-how stuff as well. It's really fun. So yeah, when you kicking back with a dram, not on a live, go check it out.
Absolutely. So yeah, keep those coming in. Kevin Harris is loving the level of knowledge and enthusiasm of all on here. Richie Gledson, fascinating chat, thoroughly enjoying this. Thank you so much, Scott and Stephen, for coming in. We always ask this as well. I mean, what are you guys drinking at the moment? I always think it's really interesting to ask about, apart from obviously, what you've spoken through with us. What's on your guys' shelves at the moment?
I've gone on a little bit of a bourbon craze over the last couple of months.
My favourite bourbon, by the way. The Elijah Craig Barrel Proof is. I've got one here at 66.7%, and it is.
I don't know if you find this, maybe not even with bourbon, but guys with another spirit. But I've got hundreds of bottles of single malt whiskey in the house, which is obviously a fascinating place to be in. But I tend to dip into one, dip into another, dip into the next, and then someone drops off a bottle of bourbon, and I find myself within a few weeks going, "Where did that go? How happens?" And that's where I've been at the last couple of weeks. But
yeah, I think I'm on just a lot of your lighter, more kind of uplifting single malts just now. I'm into. I don't know if it's a change in the weather, but as well as that, I've always got a bottle of young tequila, never too far away. I think there's so many correlations between whiskey and tequila in terms of the sense of place, people, romance, and stories. It's definitely my secret little hobby of mine, if you can call it that.
It's so interesting you saying that. So last night, I was on a Clubhouse, the new all audio thing, talking about Geneva, however you want to call it, and that really reminds me of whiskey too. So I think if you're watching and you're like, oh, I really like whiskey, what else could I dabble in? I think tequila, and then stuff like Geneva as well. Just go and give it a go, have a taste, have a mix with it. It's so fun to explore this whole world of flavour with spirits.
I think that whiskey fans like robust flavours, you know, by nature. So yeah, there's a whole world of wonderful spirits out there, and fortified wines, and it's a world out there to explore. Once you finish with whiskey.
I was drinking sherry last night and started a wonderful wine bar in London called Gordon's, which is one of my favourite places. And I just love drinking sherry. You very rarely find it in this country, so just be able to just drink sherry, and they pour it out the cask as well. It's really, really amazing. Just one thing I need to add here. Harry Jones says, dreading the idea of an all-peated box. I must add that please do not fear, because just because it's from Islay does not mean it's going to be peated.
And who's even confirmed it's from Islay?
That's also but that is so just a separate fact. Just because it's from Islay does not mean it's going to be peated. And like we've said before, I think Pour and Sip as well for us is all about discovery. I've discovered so many great whiskies on this that I never thought I would have liked before, and I thought I would like to just, you know, complete new discoveries from different places. It's really, really been an amazing thing about this subscription service is the discovery. Yeah, please do not fear, please do not dread it. Yeah.
It's funny, we have got so many votes for literally everything in the box coming through. I can't actually keep up, so we've had votes for Few, for the Glaswegian. We've got Daniel saying Waterford, Michelle saying the Glaswegian, Tom saying Waterford was stunning but all were great. We've got people saying, which I think is a cop-out, I can't decide. So that's Simon, I'm looking at you. Can't pick a favourite tonight, liked both. Sorry for my notifications going off. Bob said really hard, really pleasantly surprised by the milk and honey, loved them as well. Glaswegian, someone is stuck between Waterford and the Cu Bocan. That was Shane. For surprise, the Glaswegian from Nigel. There's so many, Andy, so many votes.
Ian Turner, Cu Bocan tonight, Few last time. We were where Richie Gledson saying Gordon's. I know, it's a great place. It's almost too great in there. It's really, really cheap as well for London, so I have to say. Adrian Carr, great chat and knowledge sharing again, guys. Thank you all so much. Chris Randall, Glaswegian, really good. Paul's Few takes some beating. Yeah, we were aware of how popular the Few was. I really agree. It's an amazing rye whiskey. But yeah, Glaswegian milk and honey, both excellent. May have to buy both. Richard Francis, lol, busted. Yes, exactly. Batman Joker, Few and Glaswegian for me. So yeah, absolutely, it's a real yes. Gerard McNeely says, Christy, we heard you have a new exciting job. Will you still be with us for the Pour and Sip?
Yes, I'm not going anywhere for Pour and Sip. I will still be here twice a month. How could I? It's the most fun you could ever have on a Thursday evening, I swear. All of these rounds.
So yeah, she's not going anywhere. And I'm really happy, by the way. I'm really happy that Christy's staying with us. So it's going to be really good with more exciting boxes coming up in the future.
Yeah, definitely. And on that note, literally, the next tasting is going to be on, I believe, the 6th of May. I'm just double checking I've got my days of the week right. Yes.
Oh my God.
So your boxes will be landing just before. So make sure you've got your drams, your tasting sets, and be ready.
This might be the first time since September, since we started doing this, that we've had a 3-week break, I would say.
I know, it's mad, isn't it? It feels like there's something not right about this. What are we going to do to entertain ourselves in the interim?
Yes, exactly. What will Thursday nights be?
I know, it's a problem. But yeah, Scott and Stephen, thank you so much for joining us this evening. It's been such a joy. 2 really different, but really like delicious, fascinating Scotch whiskies. And I think when people are like, oh, whiskey tastes the same, I'm like, oh, no. Here we have 2 Scotches that prove how diverse the whole category can be, and it's amazing.
I think the 2 whiskies tonight, for me, it just, it really highlights that progression and how interesting and fascinating and experimental whiskey can be. And, that broad spectrum of flavour from one end to the other. So, thanks for everybody for dialing in. Wonderful to see you. Yeah,
thank you for having us as well, guys.
It's been awesome. And yeah, cheers for tuning in, everyone. It's been so much fun. See you again on the 6th and enjoy the rest of the drams. Take care, all. Have a great